You know that moment when your phone lights up with yet another group chat invite, and instead of feeling excited, your energy just drops? Like the idea of spending your Saturday alphabetizing your books or sitting quietly with your thoughts sounds way more appealing than another brunch filled with surface-level conversation. For a long time, I thought that reaction meant something was wrong with me, like I was missing some social upgrade everyone else seemed to have. That was until I stumbled across what psychologists have been studying quietly for years about people who genuinely prefer fewer connections, or even solitude itself. Here's where it gets interesting. Researchers, including those at the University of Chicago, make a clear distinction between two experiences our culture constantly mixes up. One is loneliness, the painful, heavy feeling that your need for connection isn't being met. The other is chosen solitude, which is something entirely different. You can live with very few people around you and feel deeply content, or you can be surrounded by people every weekend and still feel painfully alone. The difference has very little to do with numbers. It's not about how many contacts are in your phone. It's about whether the connections you do have actually meet you emotionally. Think about the person who's kept the same 2 or 3 close friends for years versus someone with hundreds of social media connections who still feels empty. The UCLA Loneliness Scale captures this by asking questions like, do you feel left out? Or is there someone you can really talk to? And what researchers discovered is that people with similarly sized social networks can give completely opposite answers. Because what's really being measured isn't quantity. It's whether you feel understood, valued, and genuinely seen. Now here's where it starts to feel counterintuitive. People who prefer smaller circles aren't avoiding connection. They're just selective about it. Personality research consistently shows that people comfortable with solitude tend to have higher self-awareness, stronger emotional independence, and a solid sense of intrinsic motivation. In simple terms, they do things because they matter to them, not because they're chasing validation. These people aren't broken or antisocial. They just have an inner world that's rich enough that constant external approval isn't necessary. Honestly, I spent most of my 20s thinking I needed fixing. Like, why couldn't I be the person who thrived at networking events or loved chaotic dinner parties where everyone talks over each other? But here's the part science makes clear. People who are comfortable being alone possess something many don't. They can sit with their own thoughts without panic. No compulsive phone checking, no urgency to fill the silence. Psychologists refer to this as emotional self-regulation, the ability to process your own emotions without outsourcing that responsibility to someone else. And before that sounds cold or isolating, hang on. Research on loneliness and social isolation actually shows that people who tolerate solitude well often form deeper, more authentic relationships. Why? Because when they do connect, it's not driven by desperation. It comes from wholeness. They invest their limited social energy into relationships that feel real, relationships where they don't have to perform or shrink themselves. This flips the whole narrative. Quality over quantity isn't just a slogan. It's protective for mental health in a world that constantly demands access to you. One of the most striking findings comes from large-scale aging studies involving over 30,000 participants. Researchers identified a group of people who were socially isolated but reported very low levels of loneliness. They had small networks and yet weren't suffering. Sometimes they were functioning better than people with large social circles who still felt disconnected. The takeaway is powerful. The need for connection is personal and variable. Having only a few close relationships isn't a flaw. It's a valid psychological orientation. Now let's talk about creativity, because this is where the evidence gets especially compelling. Einstein famously said that a quiet, simple life fuels creative thought. Modern neuroscience supports that idea. When your brain isn't constantly managing social cues, reading faces, navigating group dynamics, or playing expected social roles, it has space to enter what psychologists call divergent thinking. That's the mental state where original ideas form, unusual connections emerge, and creativity thrives without the pressure to conform. People with fewer friends aren't lacking inspiration, they're protecting the mental space where it grows. But here's the part that deserves honesty. Having few friends doesn't automatically equal loneliness, but it also doesn't make someone immune to isolation. Research from the National Institute on Aging shows that chronic perceived isolation, the feeling of being alone in the world regardless of physical company, can impact attention, cognition, and long-term health. Persistent loneliness has been linked to cognitive decline and cardiovascular issues over time. So the real question isn't how many friends you have. It's whether you feel meaningfully connected to the people in your life. When you strip away cultural expectations about what friendship is supposed to look like, psychology reveals something important. People who thrive with fewer friendships tend to share certain traits, strong internal values, comfort with introspection, and what psychologists call self-concept clarity. They know who they are without needing constant reflection from others. They've learned that solitude isn't emptiness, it's space. Space to think, to process emotions, to create, and to grow. This doesn't mean they never feel lonely. It means they can tell the difference between the temporary discomfort of being alone and the deeper pain of feeling invisible while surrounded by people. If you've always felt slightly misaligned with the expectation to have packed calendars and massive friend groups, psychology has some reassuring news. Research consistently finds that people who prefer solitude often show higher emotional resilience, stronger boundaries, and better psychological adjustment overall. They're not lacking social skills. In many cases, they're emotionally intelligent because they reflect on relationships instead of collecting them. The mistake we make is assuming everyone needs the same social formula. Some people feel energized by daily interaction with many people. Others need one or two deep bonds and plenty of quiet to recharge and think. Neither approach is superior. They're simply different psychological needs shaped by personality, upbringing, and biology. What truly matters is alignment. Does your life reflect what you actually need, or are you forcing yourself into a social structure that leaves you drained and disconnected from yourself? Because when you really look at the psychology of people with few friends, it's not about friendship at all. It's about recognizing that human connection exists on a spectrum, and your place on that spectrum deserves respect, not judgment. The person with 2 close friends and a rich inner world isn't failing, and the person with dozens of acquaintances but no one to call at 2 a.m. isn't necessarily winning. We're all just trying to find the balance of connection and solitude that lets us feel most like ourselves. And sometimes that means choosing the quiet, even when the world keeps telling you to choose the crowd. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. And if you want to support these deeper explorations, hitting the join button to become a channel member genuinely helps. I truly appreciate it.